In the heart of Times Square, beneath 1,000 camera flashes, the impossible happened. A poor serving girl named Audrey Bennett crashed through security lines, grabbed the Untouchable CEO Liam Sterling by his pristine lapels, and kissed him before hundreds of witnesses. The crowd froze. The man who had never let anyone touch him in 34 years stood paralyzed, his ice-cold eyes flickering with something no one had ever seen before. No one knew if that kiss would save his life or destroy everything he had built forever. The Sterling Innovations product launch was supposed to be flawless, like everything else in Liam Sterling's meticulously controlled world. He stood at the podium in his $12,000 suit, every hair precisely in place, hands covered in custom leather gloves that he never removed in public. The medical technology he was about to unveil would revolutionize healthcare for millions. International investors watched from reserved seats. Press cameras rolled. Everything was perfect, sterile, untouchable, just like him. Liam Sterling had built an empire on distance. At 34, he controlled one of the most powerful tech conglomerates in New York. Yet no one had ever seen him shake hands without gloves, accept a hug, or share even the briefest moment of physical contact. His employees whispered about his obsessive cleanliness, the way he had his office sanitized 3 times daily, how he conducted meetings through glass partitions whenever possible. They called him the Ice King, the Untouchable, the man who couldn't love. They didn't know about the night when he was 7 years old, watching through a crack in the door as his mother packed her bags, kissing another man while his father lay dying in a hospital bed 3 miles away. They didn't know how she had tried to hug him goodbye, and how he had backed away, already learning that touch meant betrayal, that love meant destruction. Below the gleaming stage, Audrey Bennett balanced a tray of champagne glasses, her borrowed server uniform too large for her thin frame. 26 years old, with calloused hands and tired eyes that still somehow held light in them, she had once dreamed of being a designer. Her sketchbooks still lived under her bed in the cramped apartment she shared with her sick mother, filled with wedding dresses no one would ever wear, drawn during the 3 a.m. shifts at the hospital while her mother slept between treatments. Tonight's catering job would pay $200, enough for 5 days of medication if she skipped lunches again. The Winston Plaza Hotel had called her at the last minute, desperate for extra servers at the Sterling event. Audrey had rushed over after her day shift at the diner, changing in a subway bathroom, praying her worn shoes wouldn't show beneath the uniform hem. She moved through the crowd of billionaires and tech moguls like a ghost, invisible in the way that service workers learn to be catching fragments of conversation about stock prices and yacht purchases while calculating whether the leftover canapes might feed her mother tomorrow. Everything changed when Mrs. Hartley screamed. The elderly investor clutched her wrist diamonds, catching the light as she pointed at Audrey. Her vintage Cartier bracelet was missing, she shrieked, and that girl had just served her drink. Security descended before Audrey could speak, their hands rough on her arms, the tray crashing to the marble floor in a symphony of breaking crystal. She tried to explain that she had only offered champagne, had never touched the woman's wrist, but her voice drowned in the sudden chaos. Liam Sterling appeared like winter itself, his presence dropping the temperature of the room. His eyes passed over Audrey with the same interest he might show a piece of lint on his carpet. Something to be removed, sanitized, forgotten. His voice cut through the commotion with surgical precision. Just 4 words delivered without emotion. "Get her out now." The contempt in his tone made Audrey want to disappear into the floor. She had seen that look before in the faces of customers who complained about cold coffee just to feel powerful in the eyes of landlords who knew she couldn't afford anywhere else. But from him, this untouchable king in his glass castle, it somehow hurt more. Security dragged her toward the exit, her protests lost in the shuffle of expensive shoes moving away from her contamination. That's when she saw him. A maintenance worker who didn't belong, whose uniform was too new, whose eyes swept the room with purpose rather than boredom. He knelt beside the podium where Liam would return to speak, his hands working quickly on something small metallic. The security guards restraining her were focused on the door, not on the stage. She tried to shout a warning, but one guard's hand clamped over her mouth, dragging her backward. The maintenance worker stood slipping through a service door as Liam returned to the podium. Audrey bit down hard on the guard's palm, tasting blood and cologne as he cursed and loosened his grip. She twisted free with the desperate strength of someone who had fought bigger battles than this, launching herself toward the stage before anyone could process what was happening. The crowd parted in shock as this disheveled serving girl sprinted through their midst. Cameras swung toward her. Security shouted. Liam turned from the microphone, his eyes widening, the first genuine emotion anyone had seen from him in years. Audrey reached him in 3 more strides, and in one fluid motion that would be replayed millions of times across the internet, she grabbed his face between her small hands and pulled him down into a kiss. The world stopped. Every lens focused, every breath held. Liam Sterling, who hadn't touched another human being without gloves in over a decade, stood frozen as this stranger's lips pressed against his. Her body pushed him slightly to the side away from the podium, her hand sliding down to the microphone stand, where her fingers found what they were looking for. The kiss lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours to him. 3 seconds during which his carefully constructed walls cracked and trembled. When she finally pulled away, her hand clutched something small. A device no bigger than a quarter fell to the stage floor, wires trailing from where it had been attached to the podium's base. The tiny red light on it blinked once, twice, then went dark. Liam stared at the device, then at her face, then back at the device. His security team had already surrounded them, but he raised one gloved hand, stopping them. His voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper that the microphones still caught. "What did you just do?" Audrey's chest heaved with adrenaline and fear. She held up the device, her voice carrying across the silent plaza. "Someone put this on your podium. I saw him, the maintenance worker. I tried to warn security, but they wouldn't listen because they thought I was a thief. And I didn't know what else to do to get to you in time. And I'm sorry about the kiss, but I had to create a distraction to get close enough and—" "Stop." His voice had regained its cold control. He took the device from her hand, examining it with the expertise of someone who had built an empire on technology. His expression darkened as he recognized the components. A small explosive, not enough to level the building, but certainly enough to kill anyone standing at the podium. The timer had been set for 3 minutes from now, the exact moment he would have been midway through his presentation. But when he looked back at Audrey, his face showed no gratitude. Instead, his eyes narrowed with a different kind of recognition. This was a setup. It had to be. Some elaborate scheme for attention, for money, for 15 minutes of fame. He had seen it before, people who would do anything to get close to power, to wealth to him. "Arrest her," he said, his voice returning to its Arctic default. "Full investigation. I want to know who hired her for this stunt." The shock on Audrey's face was either genuine or perfectly acted. Security lifted her off her feet, her protests dissolving into tears as they carried her away. The last thing Liam heard was her broken voice saying she had only tried to help. The crowd erupted in chaos, phones emerging to capture every angle of the drama. Within minutes, the kiss was trending worldwide. The girl who had dared to touch the untouchable. The nobody who had assaulted New York's most powerful CEO. By morning, Audrey's face was on every screen in the city. The headlines wrote themselves, "Desperate Server Attacks CEO at Launch." The kiss heard round the world. Sterling Scandal, When Poverty Meets Power. The internet detectives went to work immediately, finding her Facebook with its 3-year-old photos, her mother's GoFundMe for cancer treatment that had raised $300 of its $50,000 goal, the community college design degree she had never finished. They called her gold digger, attention seeker, criminal worse. They found the diner where she worked and flooded it with 1-star reviews. They tracked down her landlord and convinced him she was a liability. They made her into everything ugly about ambition, about wanting more than your station allowed. The Winston Plaza Hotel fired her before she was even released from custody. The diner followed suit within hours. Liam watched it all from his office 40 floors above the city, surrounded by glass and silence. His lawyers had recommended pressing full charges: assault, attempted extortion, conspiracy to commit fraud. The device had been real, they confirmed, but that didn't mean she hadn't been part of the plot. Perhaps she had known about it. Perhaps she had arranged it herself, planning to play the hero. But something bothered him, a detail that gnawed at the edges of his organized mind like a hangnail. He pulled up the security footage again, watching from 17 different angles. There, the maintenance worker she had described. The man's face was obscured by a cap, but his movements were deliberate, practiced, and Audrey's reaction when she had seen him. The way her entire body had tensed, the genuine panic in her eyes before security grabbed her. He watched the kiss again, and again, and again. Each time he noticed something new. The way her hand shook as she reached for him. The desperation in her grip. The way she had angled her body to shield him from the podium, putting herself between him and potential danger. No one seeking fame would have thought that far ahead. No one acting would have trembled like that. 3 days after the incident, after Audrey had been released without charges but with her life destroyed, rain fell on New York like judgment. She sat on the steps of the public library, her possessions in 2 trash bags beside her, the eviction notice still crumpled in her pocket. Her mother was staying with a cousin who had room for 1, but not 2. The rain soaked through her jacket, the same one she had worn to job interviews that would never call back, now that her name was Poison. A black car pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and Liam Sterling stepped out, holding a black umbrella that he extended over her without coming close enough to touch. He looked different in the rain, she thought. Less like a statue and more like a man. The water darkened his perfect suit, and for once he didn't seem to care. "Why didn't you tell them the truth?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the rain. She laughed, but it sounded like crying. "I did. Over and over. But who believes the poor girl over the rich man's narrative?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those impossible blue eyes. "The device was real. The threat was real. You saved my life. And you destroyed mine in return." She stood, water streaming down her face, making it impossible to tell if she was crying or just drowning. "But that's how it works, isn't it? People like you need people like me to disappear after we've served our purpose." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the ice that he quickly sealed. But she had seen it. For just a moment, she had seen something human underneath all that cold perfection. "Work for me," he said, suddenly, the words surprising them both. "I need to understand how you saw what my entire security team missed. I need to know who you really are." She stared at him, rain running rivers between them. "You had me arrested. You let them destroy my life. And now you want me to work for you. I'm offering you a job, not forgiveness. Take it or leave it here in the rain." The smart answer would have been to walk away, to preserve whatever dignity she had left. But dignity didn't pay for cancer medication. Pride didn't keep a roof over her mother's head. And somewhere beneath all that ice, she thought she had seen something worth saving, just like he was starting to see the same in her. "Fine," she said, stepping under his umbrella without touching him, maintaining the careful distance he required. "But I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for the salary." "Good," he replied, already walking toward the car. "I prefer honest motivations." The Sterling Innovations building was a monument to isolation. Glass and steel and empty space designed to keep everyone at a comfortable distance from everyone else. Audrey's desk was in the basement data archives 3 floors below ground, where she would interact with files instead of people. The official title was Archive Systems Coordinator. The unofficial reality was corporate exile, a place to put her where she couldn't contaminate the Sterling brand, but could be watched, studied, understood. The other employees treated her like she had plague. Conversations stopped when she entered the break room. Emails went unanswered. Someone had taped a printout of the kiss to her computer monitor with "Gold Digger" written across it in red marker. She removed it without comment, did her work without complaint, and ate lunch alone in the emergency stairwell where no one would have to see her. But the work itself fascinated her. The medical software Sterling was developing could democratize healthcare, making advanced diagnostics available through basic smartphones. It could save millions of lives in developing nations. As she organized the files, she began to notice patterns in the code that others had missed. Small inconsistencies that nagged at her designer's eye for detail. 2 weeks into her exile, she found the first real problem. A back door in the security protocol, subtle enough that it would pass casual inspection, but devastating if exploited. She documented it carefully, submitted the report through proper channels, and assumed it would be ignored like everything else she submitted. Liam appeared at her desk the next morning, making every head in the basement turn. He never came down here. The CEO belonged in the sky, not underground with the forgotten employees. But there he stood, reading her report on his tablet, his expression unreadable. "How did you find this?" he asked. She shrugged, trying to appear casual despite her racing heart. "I used to design things. You learn to see when patterns don't match, when something is trying too hard to look natural. This code, it's like a knockoff designer bag. Perfect from a distance, but the stitching gives it away. My best security team missed this. Your security team is looking for threats from the outside. They don't expect the danger to already be in the code." He studied her for a long moment, and she resisted the urge to fidget under his gaze. Then he did something unprecedented. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat down, 3 feet away, maintaining his careful distance, but still sitting beside her. The basement went silent. "Show me what else you've found," he said. They worked for 3 hours side by side, but not touching, going through her discoveries. She had found 17 vulnerabilities in total, each one carefully hidden, each one potentially catastrophic. As she explained her process, she watched him change. The ice didn't melt exactly, but it shifted, revealing depths underneath. He asked sharp questions, challenged her assumptions, pushed her thinking further. For those 3 hours, she wasn't the girl who had kissed him, and he wasn't the untouchable CEO. They were just 2 minds solving a puzzle together. When he finally stood to leave, he paused at the elevator. "Tomorrow, same time," he said. "We're going through the entire code base." It became their routine. Every morning he would appear in the basement and they would work through the software together. Always at a careful distance, always professional, but something was building between them, a respect, maybe even a trust. She learned that he thought in layers, seeing connections others missed. He learned that she had an intuitive grasp of systems that formal education couldn't teach. 3 weeks into their morning sessions, the elevator broke. It shuddered to a stop between the 2nd and 3rd basement levels, the lights flickering before emergency power kicked in. Liam went rigid, his breathing suddenly shallow, his hands pressed flat against the walls. "Hey," Audrey said softly, recognizing panic when she saw it. "It's okay. The emergency system will kick in, 20 minutes maximum." "I can't." His voice cracked, all pretense of control shattering. "I can't be trapped. I can't." She understood then. The distance wasn't just about disgust or superiority. It was about fear. The walls he built weren't to keep others beneath him, but to keep himself safe from something that had hurt him before. "Listen to my voice," she said, staying in her corner of the elevator, not moving closer. "We're not trapped. We're just paused, like a loading screen. You know loading screens, right? This is just buffering. The system is working. We're safe." His breathing was too fast, his chest heaving in the expensive suit. She kept talking, her voice steady and calm, telling him about her mother's treatment, about the designs she still sketched at night, about the coffee shop on 3rd Avenue that made the worst lattes in New York, but stayed open because the owner was too stubborn to admit defeat. anything to keep his mind off the walls closing in. "When I was 7, he said, suddenly, his voice raw, "my mother locked me in a closet. She was leaving my father for another man, and I tried to stop her. Tried to hold on to her legs, begging her to stay. So she put me in the closet and left. My father found me 6 hours later. He was supposed to be dying in the hospital, but he came home to say goodbye to us and found me instead. Alone. In the dark." The elevator hummed around them, suspended between floors, like they were suspended between their worlds. "That's why you don't like being touched," she said. It wasn't a question. "The last person who touched me with love left me in the dark. Better to never be touched at all." Without thinking, operating on instinct rather than logic, Audrey reached out her hand. Not to touch him, just extending it into the space between them, palm up, an offering rather than a demand. "I won't leave," she said simply. "Even if the lights go out. Even if we're stuck here all night. I won't leave you in the dark." He stared at her hand for so long she thought he might break entirely. Then, with movements as careful as defusing a bomb, he reached out with one gloved finger and touched her palm. Just the briefest contact leather against skin, but she felt him shake with the effort it took. The elevator lurched back to life, and he yanked his hand away. When the doors opened, he fled without a word. She thought she had ruined everything, crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But the next morning, he was waiting at her desk with coffee. The good kind, not from the place on 3rd Avenue, and they went back to work as if nothing had happened. Except now, sometimes she caught him looking at her when he thought she wouldn't notice. And sometimes his hand would hover near hers over the keyboard, not touching but considering it. The distance between them had become a living thing charged with possibility. Everything changed the day Margaret Chen from Human Resources came to see her. The woman's face was grave as she laid out the photographs on Audrey's desk. Old photos from a hospital 15 years ago. A younger version of Audrey's mother in scrubs, standing beside a hospital bed. And in that bed, a man who looked exactly like an older version of Liam. "Your mother was Marcus Sterling's private nurse," Margaret said, her voice carefully neutral. "During his final illness. These photos were submitted to us by a concerned investor who thinks you've been planning this for years, playing a long game to get close to the Sterling fortune." Audrey stared at the photos, her mind reeling. She remembered her mother talking about a patient she had cared for, a kind man whose family had abandoned him in his final days. But she had never known his name, never made the connection. "This is circumstantial at best," Audrey said, though she could hear how weak it sounded. "Maybe. But combined with the kiss, with your sudden discovery of all these security flaws, with Mr. Sterling's unusual interest in you, the board is concerned. They want you gone. Today." Liam walked in on the conversation, taking in the photos, Margaret's stern expression, Audrey's pale face. His expression cycled through surprise, hurt, and finally settled on the cold mask she remembered from that first night. "Is it true?" he asked. "Your mother knew my father." "I didn't know," Audrey whispered. "She never told me his name. I swear I didn't know." But she could see he didn't believe her. Why would he? It was too much of a coincidence. Too perfect a con. The girl whose mother had inside information, who mysteriously saved his life, who found all those flaws in his system. Of course it was a setup. Of course she was just another person trying to use him to get close to him for money. "Clear out your desk," he said, his voice arctic. "Security will escort you out." She wanted to fight, to explain, to make him understand. But she saw it in his eyes. The walls had gone back up, reinforced and impenetrable. She had become another betrayal, another reason to never let anyone close. She packed her few belongings while he watched, maintaining that careful distance that now felt like an ocean. At the door, she turned back one last time. "I wasn't lying about the elevator," she said. "I meant it when I said I wouldn't leave you in the dark. Even now, even after this, I wouldn't leave." Something flickered in his eyes, but he turned away. You already have. The rain had returned to New York, washing the city in gray misery that matched Audrey's mood. She sat in the unemployment office, filling out forms with hands that shook from exhaustion and hunger. 3 weeks had passed since Sterling Industries. No one would hire her. The Kiss video had been remixed, memed, and turned into a cautionary tale about desperate women and the men they tried to trap. Her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. It was probably another reporter or internet troll who had found her number. But something made her pick up. "Don't go home." The voice was male, unfamiliar, urgent. "They're waiting for you there. You saw too much in those files. You found things you weren't supposed to find." "Who is this?" "Someone who knows what's really happening at Sterling. Someone who needs you to disappear before they make you disappear permanently. You have 10 minutes before they realize you're not coming home. Run." The line went dead. Audrey stood in the unemployment office, her heart racing. It could be a prank. It could be paranoia. But something in the voice had sounded genuinely terrified, not for themselves, but for her. She thought about the vulnerabilities she had found in the code, the back doors that someone had deliberately placed, her reports that had gone to Liam, but also through the system visible to anyone with high enough clearance. If someone was using Sterling's medical software for something illegal, money laundering, data theft worse, then she had indeed seen too much. Instead of going home, she went to the public library, using their computers to dig deeper into what she had discovered. The patterns in the code weren't random. They were systematic, designed to siphon small amounts of money from each transaction, pennies that would add up to millions across the entire system. And the authorization signatures all traced back to one account, Damian Cole, Liam's most trusted assistant, the man who had been with him since the company's founding. She tried calling Liam, but his number was blocked. Tried emailing, but the messages bounced back. Tried going to the building, but security had her photo at every entrance with orders to call the police if she appeared. She was completely cut off, sitting on information that could destroy his company with no way to warn him. That's when they took her. Professional, efficient, grabbing her off the street as she left the library. A van, a cloth over her face that smelled like chemicals, then darkness. She woke up zip-tied to a chair in what looked like an abandoned warehouse, the kind of place where bad things happen to people who knew too much. Damian Cole sat across from her, looking nothing like the polished assistant she had seen in the Sterling building. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes wild, and his hands shook as he held a gun that looked too large for his grip. "You couldn't just take your firing and disappear," he said. "You had to keep digging. Do you have any idea what you've cost me? 5 years of perfect planning ruined because some nobody server girl wanted to play hero?" "Liam will notice I'm missing," she lied, hoping desperation didn't show in her voice. Damian laughed ugly and sharp. "Sterling. He thinks you're a con artist who tried to seduce him for money. He's probably celebrating that you're gone. No one is coming for you. No one even knows you're missing." But he was wrong, because Liam Sterling, for all his coldness, for all his distance, was not a stupid man. The call to Audrey's phone had been traced. The van that took her had been caught on traffic cameras he had accessed through connections he shouldn't have. And now he was driving through the rain in a car he had hot-wired a skill learned in the year after his mother left, when he had been wild with grief and rage before his father taught him to channel it into building an empire. He found the warehouse by following digital breadcrumbs Damian had been too panicked to properly hide. The man might be smart enough to embezzle millions, but he wasn't smart enough to do it while terrified. Fear made people sloppy, and Damian was drowning in fear. Liam entered through a broken window, moving with the kind of purpose that came from finally understanding everything. Audrey's discoveries hadn't been luck or con artistry. They had been genuine brilliance pattern recognition that had saved his company from a poison that had been there from the beginning. And Damian, his trusted friend, the man who had been there through everything, had been the source of that poison all along. The confrontation was brief and violent. Damian, seeing Liam appear like an avenging ghost, fired wildly. One bullet caught Liam in the shoulder, spinning him back, blood spreading across his white shirt. But momentum and rage carried him forward, and he crashed into Damien with all the force of 11 years of suppressed physical contact, every barrier breaking at once. They fought with the desperation of men who had everything to lose. But Liam had something Damien didn't, someone to save. That made him faster, stronger, more willing to take the pain. He broke Damien's wrist, sent the gun spinning across the concrete, and put him down with a punch that had all his betrayed trust behind it. Police sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Someone had heard the gunshot. Liam stumbled to Audrey, his shoulder screaming blood, making his fingers slippery as he worked at the zip ties. "You came," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Even though you thought I was lying, you came." "I was wrong," he said, his voice rough with pain and something else, something that sounded like emotion. "About you. About everything. I was so afraid of being betrayed again that I betrayed the only person who actually tried to save me." The zip ties finally gave way, and she caught him as he swayed, his blood warm on her hands. Without thinking, without hesitation, she pressed her palm to his face, skin to skin, no barriers between them. "We're even then," she said. "You saved me too." He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing, 11 years of isolation crumbling in a single moment. When he opened them again, she saw everything, the fear, the loneliness, the desperate hope he had buried under all that ice. "The kiss," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "At the launch. It wasn't just about the bomb, was it?" She smiled through her tears. "I had about 2 seconds to think of a distraction. I could have tackled you, could have screamed. But some part of me, even in that panic, wanted to know what it would feel like. To be the first person to touch you in years. And it felt like saving someone who didn't know they were drowning." The police burst in then, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Damien was conscious but broken, screaming about entrapment and lawyers. The EMTs swarmed Liam, trying to separate him from Audrey to treat his shoulder. But he held on, his blood-slicked hand gripping hers with the determination of someone who had finally found something worth holding. Later in the hospital, with his shoulder bandaged and his system full of painkillers that made everything soft around the edges, he watched her sleep in the uncomfortable visitor's chair beside his bed. She had refused to leave despite the nurses' protests, despite not being family, despite having every reason to walk away from him and his disaster of a life. When she woke, he was sitting up, typing one-handed on his laptop. She could see the screen, a press release admitting everything. His failure to see the truth. His rush to judgment. Her innocence and heroism. His public apology and announcement of the Aurora Foundation, which she would run helping women who had been falsely accused or denied opportunities because of prejudice and assumption. "You don't have to do this," she said. "Yes, I do. I spent so long being untouchable that I forgot what it meant to be human. You reminded me even when I didn't deserve it." He closed the laptop, looking at her with eyes that were finally fully thawed. "I'm resigning as CEO. The board can handle the company. I want to build something new, something better, with you if you'll have me. I'm a nobody server girl, remember? What would people say? That you're the woman who saved my life twice, once from a bomb and once from myself." The press conference was held on a Tuesday morning 6 months after the kiss that had started everything. Liam stood at the podium, the same podium where it had all begun, but this time Audrey stood beside him. Not behind, not in the shadows, but beside him, as an equal. He spoke without notes, without a script, his hand holding hers in full view of the cameras. He told the truth, all of it, even the parts that made him look weak, foolish, cold. He talked about the boy in the closet, the man in the tower, the woman who had broken through every defense he had built. He announced Damien's arrest, the full extent of the embezzlement that Audrey had uncovered, the security flaws that would have destroyed millions of lives if she hadn't found them. I spent my entire life believing that distance was strength, he said, his voice carrying across the packed plaza. That never being touched meant never being hurt. But isolation isn't strength, it's just fear wearing an expensive suit. Real strength is admitting when you're wrong. Real strength is letting someone else save you when you're drowning in your own defenses. A reporter shouted from the crowd, "Mr. Sterling, is it true that you're engaged to Miss Bennett?" Liam looked at Audrey, a question in his eyes. They hadn't talked about marriage, hadn't even officially dated in any conventional sense. They had simply been rebuilding together, learning how to be human, how to trust, how to touch without fearing abandonment. But Audrey, brave as always, took the microphone. "We're not engaged," she said, and felt him tense beside her. Then she smiled. "But if he asked, I'd say yes." The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed, and Liam Sterling, the man who had never touched anyone for 11 years, pulled Audrey Bennett into his arms and kissed her in front of the whole world. Not desperately like that first time, not hesitantly like in the warehouse, but completely openly like a man who had finally learned that some things were worth the risk of being hurt. 1 year later, snow fell on New York as they cut the ribbon on the Aurora Medical Center. Free health care for those who couldn't afford it, funded by the recovered embezzlement money and matched by donations from investors who had been moved by their story. The building stood where that abandoned warehouse had been transformation from a place of violence to a place of healing. Inside, Audrey's mother was receiving her treatment from the best oncologists in the city, finally getting the care she had needed for so long. The walls were decorated with Audrey's designs, not the wedding dresses she had once dreamed of, but murals of hope, of hands reaching for each other, of connection, triumphing over isolation. A reporter from the Times asked them, "Looking back, would you change anything about how you met?" Liam pulled Audrey closer, no longer afraid of being seen touching her, needing her, loving her. "Every scar tells a story," he said. "Ours just happened to be very public, but every mistake, every misunderstanding, every moment of pain led us here. So no, I wouldn't change anything. Even the kiss that almost destroyed your reputation." This time Audrey answered, snowflakes catching in her hair like stars. "Especially the kiss. Sometimes you have to be brave enough to break through someone's walls even when the whole world is watching, even when they might push you away. Because the alternative, letting someone stay frozen forever, is so much worse than the risk of rejection." As the crowd dispersed and the cameras turned off, they stood together in the snow, watching the city lights twinkle through the falling white. His hand found hers, skin to skin, warm despite the cold. No gloves, no barriers, no distance. "Thank you," he whispered, words meant only for her. "For what? For being brave enough to kiss me when I was too frozen to save myself. For seeing past the ice to the person underneath. For not leaving me in the dark." She turned to face him fully, her hands framing his face the same way she had that first night, but tenderly now, with the confidence of someone who knew they were loved in return. "You're not cold anymore," she said, and it wasn't a question. "No," he agreed, leaning down toward her. "I learned that from you. Love isn't about staying safe. It's about finding someone worth melting for." They kissed again as the snow fell harder, blanketing the city in fresh white that covered all the old scars and mistakes. Around them, the medical center glowed with warm light, filled with people helping people, touching lives, making connections. It was the opposite of everything Liam's empire had been. Not a monument to isolation, but to community, not built on distance, but on closeness. The security guard watching the entrance smiled at the couple in the snow. He had been there that night at the product launch, had been one of the ones to drag Audrey away. Now he worked for her foundation, grateful for second chances, for the power of forgiveness, for the reminder that sometimes the most unexpected people could save your life. Inside the medical center, a little girl was drawing on the walls with washable markers, something Audrey had insisted on remembering her own childhood dreams deferred. The girl was drawing two figures holding hands, one very tall and one shorter, surrounded by hearts and stars, and the kind of joy that only children could capture. "Who's that?" her mother asked. "The lady and the man who kiss in the snow," the girl said matter-of-factly. "They come here every week. He used to be scared of hugs, but she fixed him. Now they hug everyone." It wasn't entirely accurate, but it held a truth that all the newspaper articles and viral videos had missed. Love wasn't about the dramatic moments, the public kisses, the daring rescues, the grand apologies. It was about the small healings, the daily choices to reach out instead of pulling away, the quiet bravery of believing that another person was worth the risk. As the evening stretched on, Liam and Audrey made their rounds through the medical center, checking on patients, talking to staff, being present in a way he never could have imagined before her. His hand never left hers, a constant connection that still amazed him. 11 years of isolation ended by one desperate kiss, one brave girl who saw past all his defenses to the frightened boy still locked in a closet waiting for someone to find him. The last patient they visited was an elderly woman who had been at the product launch that night. She recognized them immediately, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "You know," she said, "I never did find that bracelet. Security was so busy with you two that whoever really took it got clean away. But I figure it was worth it. That kiss of yours was worth more than any jewelry." Audrey laughed, the sound filling the room like music. "I'm sorry you lost your bracelet." "Don't be. I got to witness history. The night the coldest man in New York learned how to love. That's worth more than diamonds." Later, much later, when the medical center had closed for the evening and they were alone in the office that used to be a storage closet where Audrey had first discovered the coding vulnerabilities, she pulled out a small wrapped package. "What's this?" Liam asked. "Open it." Inside was a simple leather bracelet with a small metal charm, a tiny key. "I know it's silly," she said, suddenly shy. "But I thought, you spent so long locked away. This is to remind you that you have the key now. You can come out whenever you want. You're not trapped anymore." He put it on immediately, the leather soft against his wrist where his expensive watch used to be. Then he pulled out his own package, slightly larger, wrapped in paper, covered in her design sketches that he had saved from her old desk. Inside was a set of professional design software, the kind she had never been able to afford, and a business card reading, "Audrey Sterling, Chief Design Officer, Aurora Foundation." "Sterling?" she questioned, her eyebrows raising. "If you'll have the name," he said. And this time he did go down on one knee, pulling out a ring that was nothing like what anyone would expect from a billionaire. It was silver, not platinum, with a small sapphire surrounded by tiny stars, a night sky captured in metal and stone. "I had it made from a sketch in your notebook, the one labeled Impossible Dreams. You went through my sketches. You went through my code. Fair's fair." He looked up at her, vulnerable in a way that still took her breath away. "Audrey Bennett, you kissed me when I was untouchable, saved me when I was insufferable, and loved me when I was unlovable. Will you marry me, not because it's a fairy tale ending, but because it's a real beginning?" She knelt down to his level, taking his face in her hands the way she had that first night. The way she did every morning now, the way she would for the rest of their lives. "Yes," she said, "but I have a condition. Anything. No more walls, no more distance, no more being untouchable. I want all of you, even the scared parts, especially the scared parts." "Deal," he said, slipping the ring onto her finger. "But I have a condition too." "What's that?" "Kiss me like you did that first time, like you're saving my life, because you are Audrey. Every single day you are." So she did there on the floor of a converted storage closet in a medical center built on the ashes of their mistakes. She kissed him like the world was watching, like everything depended on it, like love was the bravest thing two people could do. And somewhere in the city, the video of their first kiss played on someone's phone, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected moments led to the most extraordinary love stories. That sometimes a kiss could save a life. That sometimes the coldest hearts just needed the right person brave enough to bring the warmth. The snow continued to fall on New York, blanketing the city in white that made everything look new, possible clean. In the morning, there would be slush and traffic and reality. But tonight, there was magic in the air, the kind that happened when two people chose each other, despite every reason not to, when love conquered fear, when a single kiss changed everything. Liam and Audrey Sterling stood together at the window, watching the snow fall. Her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, touching always now because they had learned that connection was not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. They had started with a kiss born of desperation and would continue with a love born of choice, building their life together on the radical idea that no one was untouchable, that everyone deserved to be saved, and that sometimes the poorest girl could teach the richest man that the only real wealth was being brave enough to let someone love you. The end came not with drama, but with quiet contentment, with two people who had found each other against all odds, who had broken through each other's defenses, who had learned that love wasn't about perfection, but about the courage to be imperfect together. And in a city of 8 million strangers, that was the greatest miracle of all.